My wife texted, "I'll be working overnight with my boss, Joe, tonight. Don't wait up." I replied, "Thanks for letting me know." Then I packed her entire wardrobe in boxes and left them at Joe's office door. Her 4 a.m. panic call. So here's the thing about life. It has this real twisted sense of humor, like that friend who thinks it's hilarious to tell you your flies down right after you've given a presentation to your entire department. That's exactly what Wednesday night felt like when my whole world decided to take a hard left turn straight into Jerry Springer territory. My name is Marcus Dalton, 32 years old, software consultant by day and apparently amateur detective by night, though I didn't know that part yet. I've got what my grandmother used to call good instincts and what my therapist calls hypervigilance issues. But hey, potato, right? The point is, my guts never steered me wrong, even when my brain's been dumber than a box of rocks. That particular evening started off normal enough. You know, the kind of boring suburban normalcy that makes you wonder if this is really what adulting was supposed to feel like. I was standing in my kitchen, wrestling with a box of penne pasta that apparently required a PhD in engineering to open, when I heard that familiar little ping from my phone. You know the sound, that innocent little notification that could either be your mom asking if you're eating enough vegetables or the digital equivalent of a grenade pin being pulled. I glanced over at the phone sitting on the granite countertop that Julia insisted we needed because everyone has granite now, Marcus, and smiled. Probably just my wife reminding me to pick up milk or asking if I remembered to pay the electric bill. Julia's always been the organized one in our relationship, the type who has color-coded calendars and actually uses the reminder app on her phone for stuff other than avoiding awkward small talk with neighbors. But when I picked up that phone and read the message, I swear I could hear the sound effect from those old Western movies, you know, the one that plays right before someone draws their gun in the middle of Main Street. The message was short, sweet, and about as subtle as a brick through a window. "I'll be working overnight with my boss Joe tonight. Don't wait up." Now, let me paint you a picture here. Julia works in marketing for some fancy firm downtown, the kind of place where everyone drinks overpriced coffee and uses words like synergy in actual sentences without irony. Her boss Joe is one of those guys who probably peaked in college but thinks he's still got it. You know the type. Designer stubble, expensive watches, and the kind of cologne that announces his presence 3 minutes before he actually walks into a room. But here's the kicker. Julia's never, and I mean never, worked overnight in the 5 years she's been at that company. Hell, the woman complains if she has to stay past 5:30 because it cuts into her yoga class time. So reading that text was like watching a magic trick where the magician forgets to hide the rabbit before pulling it out of the hat. My brain started doing that thing where it connects dots faster than a kid with a new box of crayons. Working overnight. With Joe. The same Joe who's been sending her LinkedIn messages about networking opportunities for the past month. The same Joe who coincidentally showed up at our neighborhood Starbucks last weekend, acting all surprised to run into Julia like he hadn't obviously stalked her Instagram stories to figure out where she gets her morning latte. Translation? I'll be practicing overtime cardio. Now, here's where most guys would probably lose their minds, start throwing things, maybe punch a wall, and end up with a broken hand and a really awkward emergency room visit. But me? I've always been more of a chess player than a checkers guy. My dad used to say, "Marcus, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. And when someone tries to play you for a fool, show them what a real player looks like." So instead of flying into some dramatic rage that would have made Julia feel justified in whatever the hell she was doing, I took a deep breath, counted to 10 like my anger management app suggested. Don't judge me. We all have our digital crutches, and crafted the most beautifully passive-aggressive response in the history of text messaging. "Thanks for letting me know." 7 words. No emojis, no follow-up questions, no angry typing indicators that would give away my emotional state. Just 7 perfectly polite, completely neutral words that probably made Julia stare at her phone for a good 5 minutes trying to figure out what I really meant. Because here's the thing about cheaters, they're paranoid as hell. They know they're being shady, so they assume everyone else is being shady right back. I set the phone down, went back to my pasta, and started stirring with the kind of calm that comes right before the storm. You know that feeling when you're so angry that you actually become zen? Like, you've transcended regular human emotions and entered some kind of advanced level of pissed off where everything becomes crystal clear? That's when it hit me. That beautiful, terrible, absolutely perfect idea that would either make me a legend or land me in divorce court. Probably both, if I'm being honest. I looked around my kitchen at our shared life with its matching dish towels and coffee mugs that said Mr. and Mrs. in that cutesy font that seemed so charming when we got married, and I thought, well, Joe's office is about to get a new interior design upgrade. Julia's entire closet. I couldn't help but smirk as I drained the pasta water. The steam rose up like incense at the altar of my newfound clarity, and for the first time in months, hell, maybe years, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done. Game on, Julia. Game on. You know that moment when you realize you're about to do something either brilliant or completely insane, and you're not entirely sure which one it is? Yeah, that was me standing in my bedroom at 9:47 p.m., staring at Julia's side of the walk-in closet like I was Indiana Jones about to navigate some ancient temple filled with designer booby traps. Let me tell you something about my wife's closet. It's like a small country with its own economy, complete with districts for different seasons and diplomatic relations between shoes and handbags. The woman has more clothes than most department stores, and every single piece has a story, a price tag that made me question our financial decisions, and apparently, a memory attached to it that I was about to box up and ship out. I grabbed the first empty Amazon box from our garage, because of course we had a stack of them. We're millennials. We basically survive on Prime deliveries and the false hope that we'll actually use those storage containers we keep ordering. This particular box had contained Julia's latest impulse buy, a set of revolutionary workout bands that were currently gathering dust under our bed, right next to the juicer, the bread maker, and that weird contraption that was supposed to give us restaurant-quality salads at home. Standing in front of her color-coordinated wardrobe, I felt like I was about to perform surgery, except instead of saving a life, I was methodically dissecting a marriage. I started with her work clothes, those perfectly pressed blouses that probably cost more than my first car. Each one folded with the kind of precision that would make Marie Kondo weep with joy. But instead of asking if it sparked joy, I was asking if it sparked the urge to throw it in Joe's face. Her navy blue blazer, the one she wore to our anniversary dinner last month, where she spent half the evening texting work emergencies, went into the box first, followed by that cream silk blouse she claimed made her feel confident and professional. Yeah, professional at something, all right. Then came the little black dress she bought for the company Christmas party, the one where she danced a little too close to Joe during the slow songs while I stood by the punch bowl wondering if I was being paranoid. Each piece of clothing felt like evidence in a courtroom, and I was both the detective and the prosecutor building a case. Her $600 Jimmy Choo heels, the ones she said were an investment in her career, got wrapped in bubble wrap like they were priceless artifacts, which, considering how much she paid for them, they basically were. Those shoes had walked into more late meetings and client dinners than I could count, and now they were taking their final walk right out of my life. But the real kicker was that ridiculous scarf, the one with the abstract pattern that looked like someone had sneezed paint onto expensive fabric. I remembered the day she came home with it, practically glowing as she told me how Joe had complimented it during their brainstorming session. She'd worn it at least twice a week since then, always on days when she had meetings with Joe's team. That sucker went right to the front and center of box number 2, like a flag of surrender in the war I didn't even know I was fighting. By the time I got to her pajamas, including those obnoxious live, laugh, love ones her sister gave her for Christmas, I was in full-blown therapeutic mode. Who the hell needs expensive therapy when you can pack betrayal into cardboard boxes? Each fold was like a meditation, each sealed box a step toward enlightenment, or a complete mental breakdown. At this point, I wasn't entirely sure there was a difference. Box 4 contained her gym clothes, which was ironically hilarious considering the woman hadn't seen the inside of a gym since Obama was president, but apparently, she'd been getting plenty of cardio elsewhere. I found myself humming while I folded her yoga pants, the expensive ones from that brand that celebrities endorse, as if spending $120 on stretchy pants would somehow make her more spiritually enlightened. By box 6, I'd graduated to full-on whistling. Don't Worry, Be Happy seemed appropriate, though I'm pretty sure Bobby McFerrin never intended it as a divorce anthem. My neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, probably thought I'd finally snapped and was having some kind of manic episode. She'd been giving me concerned looks over the fence for weeks, like she could sense the domestic tension radiating from our perfectly manicured suburban home. The funny thing about repetitive tasks is how they clear your mind. Each sweater, each pair of jeans, each ridiculously expensive piece of lingerie that I definitely hadn't seen in months, they all went into their designated boxes with military precision. I was like a one-man moving company, except instead of charging by the hour, I was charging by the year of marriage wasted. When I got to her jewelry box, that mahogany monstrosity that took up half the dresser, I actually paused. This was the heavy artillery, the emotional landmines disguised as sentimental gifts. Her engagement ring was obviously still on her finger, probably making it awkward to hold hands with Joe, but everything else was fair game. The pearl earrings I'd bought her for our second anniversary, the tennis bracelet from her last promotion, the vintage necklace she'd inherited from her grandmother, all of it carefully wrapped and boxed like I was preparing for the world's most passive-aggressive yard sale. By box 10, something magical happened. I started laughing. Not the bitter, angry laugh of a man whose world was falling apart, but the genuine, belly-deep laughter of someone who'd finally figured out the punchline to a joke that had been building for months. Mrs. Henderson actually knocked on our front door, her face creased with concern, asking if I was okay because she could hear me cackling through the walls. "Oh, I'm fine, Mrs. H," I told her, probably looking like a complete maniac with my hair sticking up and cardboard dust on my shirt. "Just watching some comedy." She raised an eyebrow. "What show?" I grinned, gesturing toward the tower of boxes in my living room. "Nope, just packing my wife's personality into boxes. Turns out it fits perfectly into standard shipping containers." The look on her face was absolutely priceless. By 11 p.m., my Honda Civic looked like it had been violated by a Nordstrom explosion. 10 boxes perfectly stacked in the back seat, 2 oversized suitcases wrestling for space in the trunk, and Julia's precious handbag collection scattered across the passenger seat like expensive confetti. If anyone had pulled me over, they'd have assumed I was either moving across the country or running some kind of high-end black market operation in designer accessories. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was driving across town in the same car Julia always complained about. "Marcus, we need something bigger, something more sophisticated," she'd say, eyeing her co-workers' BMWs and Mercedes in the company parking lot. "Well, guess what, Julia? Tonight, this humble Civic was about to become the chariot of your comeuppance, and it was running better than your marriage." I cranked up the radio, and the universe decided to throw me a bone. The classic rock station was having a Heartbreak Hits marathon. Perfect. Before He Cheats by Carrie Underwood came blasting through my speakers, and I couldn't help but sing along. Though instead of taking a Louisville Slugger to both headlights, I was taking a Honda Civic full of consequences to Joe's doorstep. Same energy, different execution. The drive to Joe's office complex was like a therapeutic road trip through the stages of grief, except I'd apparently skipped straight past denial, anger, and bargaining, and landed squarely in acceptance with a PhD in petty revenge. Every red light gave me time to admire my handiwork in the rearview mirror. Those boxes were packed with the kind of precision that would make a professional mover jealous and a marriage counselor rich. Downtown looked different at this hour, like a movie set after all the actors had gone home. The streets that were usually packed with stressed-out commuters and overpriced food trucks were now eerily quiet, populated only by the occasional Uber driver and whatever poor soul was working the graveyard shift at the 7-Eleven. It felt apocalyptic in the best possible way, like I was the last man standing in a world that had finally made sense. Joe's office building was one of those modern glass monstrosities that looked like it was designed by someone who'd never actually worked in an office. All sharp angles and reflective surfaces, the kind of place where you needed a GPS to find the bathroom and a degree in architecture to figure out which elevator actually went to your floor. During the day, it probably buzzed with the energy of ambitious young professionals climbing corporate ladders. At night, it looked like a giant metaphor for everything hollow about the modern workplace. But here's where the universe decided to gift wrap this whole operation with a shiny bow. The security guard was completely passed out in his little booth, snoring loud enough to wake the dead in 3 time zones. This guy wasn't just asleep. He was performing a one-man symphony of unconsciousness, complete with the kind of snores that suggested he'd probably been hitting the vending machine coffee a little too hard during his shift. I parked right in front of the building, hazards flashing like I was making some kind of legitimate delivery, which, technically, I guess I was. Special delivery from the Department of Karmic Justice. Signature not required. The security guard didn't even twitch when I slammed my car door, confirming that this man was operating on a level of sleep that most people only achieve after Thanksgiving dinner. Getting past him was easier than sneaking cookies from the kitchen when I was 12. I grabbed the two heaviest suitcases first, figuring I'd work my way down to the smaller stuff. Walking through that lobby felt like I was in some kind of heist movie, except instead of stealing diamonds, I was delivering the consequences of someone else's poor life choices. The elevator ride to Joe's floor was surreal. Just me, two suitcases full of Julia's designer everything, and the soft jazz music that all office buildings seem to think makes waiting more pleasant. I caught my reflection in the polished elevator doors and had to admit, I looked pretty good for a guy whose marriage had imploded 12 hours ago. There's something to be said for having a purpose, even when that purpose involves potentially committing what might technically be considered trespassing. Joe's office was at the end of the hall, marked with one of those fancy nameplates that probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. Joseph Richardson, Senior Marketing Director. The door was solid wood, the kind that screamed, "I make six figures and have strong opinions about wine," which made it the perfect backdrop for what I was about to do. One by one, I made my trips from the elevator to Joe's door, building a monument to martial disaster right there in the corporate hallway. The boxes stacked up like building blocks, each one a testament to Julia's expensive taste and my newfound commitment to creative problem-solving. Her suitcases flanked the pile like bookends, and her handbag collection created a designer border that probably represented more money than most people's car payments. The whole setup was beautiful in its own twisted way, like an art installation titled "The Physical Manifestation of Someone Else's Problem." I stepped back to admire my work, and I have to say, it looked professional. If Julia was going to move in with Joe, she might as well do it with style. But the masterpiece wasn't complete without the proper documentation. I pulled out a piece of paper from my wallet, the back of a receipt from the grocery store where I'd bought ingredients for the dinner Julia never came home to eat, and wrote what might have been the most satisfying note of my entire life. Julia's belongings. She's your problem now. Marcus. Short, sweet, and to the point. No unnecessary drama, no lengthy explanations, just a simple transfer of ownership that would make any legal document proud. I placed it right on top of the highest box, where it couldn't possibly be missed, like a flag claiming territory in the name of poetic justice. I stepped back, pulled out my phone, and took a photo that belonged in the Smithsonian's Hall of Beautiful Revenge. The lighting was perfect, the composition was artistic, and the message was crystal clear. This picture was going straight into my Evidence of Brilliance folder, right next to screenshots of Julia's suspicious text messages and that photo of her car in Joe's driveway last month that she claimed was just a coincidence. Standing there in that corporate hallway, surrounded by the physical evidence of my wife's betrayal now gift-wrapped for her boss, I whispered to the universe, "Special delivery. Handle with care, contents fragile, her loyalty." The elevator ride down felt like floating. You know what's better than a good night's sleep? The sound of karma calling at 4 a.m. to let you know it's clocked in for its shift. I'd barely gotten 3 hours of the most peaceful sleep I'd had in months when my phone started buzzing like an angry wasp trapped in a mason jar. At first, I figured it was probably a wrong number or some emergency alert about a missing person, which, technically, it kind of was. But when I rolled over and saw Julia's contact photo lighting up my screen like a neon sign advertising panic, I knew my little midnight delivery service had been discovered. Her picture, one of those couple selfies we'd taken during happier times at some wine festival, both of us grinning like idiots who thought they'd figured out the secret to eternal happiness, was now flashing at me with the urgency of a fire alarm. The phone buzzed once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail, then immediately started ringing again, and again, and again. It was like Julia had discovered the redial button for the first time and decided to treat it like a slot machine, convinced that if she just kept pulling the lever, eventually she'd hit the jackpot of me picking up and pretending this was all some big misunderstanding. I let it ring 6 more times while I lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling and enjoying what was probably the last moment of peace I'd have for the next several hours. There's something beautifully satisfying about watching someone's desperation play out in real time through missed call notifications. Each buzz was like a little victory bell, confirming that my carefully orchestrated plan was working exactly as intended. Finally, on what must have been the 15th call, I decided to put Julia out of her misery. I swiped to answer with the casual indifference of someone taking a customer service call about an overdue library book. "Hello," I said, injecting just the right amount of sleepy confusion into my voice, like I was genuinely surprised to be receiving a phone call at this ungodly hour. "Marcus." Julia's voice exploded through the speaker so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She sounded like she was either having a complete meltdown or auditioning for a role in a soap opera. Possibly both. "What did you do?" "My clothes, my life, are outside Joe's office." "Are you completely insane?" I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. This was even better than I'd imagined. In my head, I'd pictured Julia discovering her belongings with embarrassed confusion, maybe some tears, definitely some awkward explanations to Joe about why her entire wardrobe had apparently followed her to work. But this level of hysteria? This was bonus content. I stretched theatrically, even though she couldn't see me, and let out an exaggerated yawn that would have made Shakespeare proud. "Oh, hey, Julia. Wow, for AM? That's really late to still be at the office. Or early. I'm not sure which. Time zones are confusing when you're working such long hours." "Don't play dumb with me," she shrieked, and I could practically hear her pacing frantically wherever she was. Probably standing in that sterile office hallway, surrounded by boxes, and trying to figure out how to explain this to Joe, who was undoubtedly hiding somewhere nearby wondering what the hell he'd gotten himself into. "You know what you did. You dumped all my stuff here like some kind of psychopath." "Psychopath?" I repeated, genuinely offended. "Julia, that's hurtful. I prefer logistics coordinator." "I was just being helpful. You said you'd be working overnight with Joe, so I figured. Why make 2 trips? I saved you the trouble of having to go back and forth between our house and your new workspace." The silence that followed was so long, I actually checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. When she finally spoke again, her voice had dropped to that dangerously quiet register that wives use right before they either start crying or start throwing things. "You packed all my clothes." "Yep. My shoes. Every last pair. My jewelry. Even that ugly bracelet your mother gave you. And you drove across town to dump it all at my boss's office." "Well," I said, settling back into my pillow with a grin, "when you put it like that, it sounds like I went above and beyond. Most husbands would have just left it on the front lawn. I provided door-to-door service. You should be thanking me for my consideration." "People will see." She exploded again, and now I could definitely hear the tears starting. "The security cameras, the cleaning crew, other employees, everyone's going to know." And there it was, the real issue. Not that I'd discovered her affair, not that our marriage was over, not even that I'd violated her precious belongings by touching them. No, Julia was upset because she'd been caught. Her carefully constructed double life was now displayed for everyone to see, literally stacked in boxes outside her lover's office like the world's most expensive yard sale of shame. "That's the point, sweetheart," I said, letting the endearment drip with just enough sarcasm to make it clear it wasn't meant affectionately anymore. "Now everyone knows you're committed to your boss's door, and probably other parts of his office, but let's not get into the details. I'm sure HR has policies about that sort of thing." "You bastard," she whispered, and I could hear her crying now, those ugly sobs that happen when someone realizes they've been outplayed. "You planned this." "Planned what?" "Being a supportive husband who made sure you had everything you needed for your overnight work session." "Julia, I'm hurt that you'd accuse me of having ulterior motives. I was just being thoughtful. This is cruel, Marcus. Even for you. Even for me?" I sat up in bed, genuinely curious now. What's that supposed to mean? When have I ever been cruel to you? When have I been anything but understanding about your late nights, your mysterious text messages, your sudden interest in working overtime with your boss? I've been a goddamn saint, Julia, and we both know it. She was full-on crying now, the kind of tears that come when someone realizes they've burned a bridge they didn't mean to burn. I can't explain this to people. How am I supposed to explain why my clothes are here?" "Simple," I said cheerfully. "Tell them the truth." Tell them your husband found out about your affair and decided to save you the trouble of moving out by delivering your stuff directly to your new boyfriend's office. People love honesty, Julia. It's refreshing. I hate you, she sobbed. No, you don't, I replied calmly. You hate that you got caught. I should have known that Julia's 4 a.m. meltdown was just the opening act in what was about to become a full-scale family production. By the time I'd managed to grab a shower and make myself a decent cup of coffee, the good stuff I kept hidden from Julia because she always complained it was too strong, which now seemed like a metaphor for our entire relationship, the cavalry had arrived. My phone rang at exactly 7:43 a.m., and I didn't even need to look at the caller ID to know who it was. There's a special kind of ringtone that comes with impending maternal doom, like when your mom calls after she's heard you did something stupid, except this wasn't my mom. This was Patricia Hendricks, Julia's mother, and the woman who'd spent the last 5 years treating me like I was a temporary inconvenience in her daughter's otherwise perfect life. Patricia had never liked me, not from day one when I showed up to family dinner wearing jeans instead of khakis, and definitely not when I had the audacity to marry her precious daughter without asking for her blessing first. She'd spent our entire engagement dropping subtle hints about how Julia deserved someone more ambitious, which was rich coming from a woman whose biggest life achievement was organizing the church bake sale fundraiser 3 years running. Patricia, I answered, settling into my favorite chair with my coffee and preparing for what I knew was going to be an epic performance. What a pleasant surprise. It's been what, 6 weeks since you've called to tell me how I'm failing your daughter? I was starting to worry you didn't care anymore. How dare you? She launched right in. No pleasantries, no warm-up, just straight into full banshee mode like she'd been practicing this speech since dawn. How dare you throw Julia's things out like she's some kind of common criminal? She's your wife, Marcus. Your wife. I took a long, deliberate sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable. Actually, Patricia, that's where you're wrong. She's Joe's overnight assistant now. I'm just the guy who handles the logistics. Don't you get smart with me, young man. Oh, here we go with the young man treatment. Patricia always pulled out the disciplinary mom voice when she was really gearing up for a lecture. I don't know what's gotten into you, but this behavior is completely unacceptable. Julia is devastated. And it's all because you've lost your mind. Devastated that she got caught, you mean? I asked innocently, because I'm pretty sure she was feeling pretty good about things around midnight last night when she was practicing her presentation skills with her boss. That's enough. Patricia shrieked so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. I don't know what lies you've convinced yourself of, but Julia would never do what you're implying. She's a good girl from a good family, and she doesn't deserve this kind of treatment from her husband. And there it was, the classic maternal defense mechanism. When faced with evidence that their precious child has screwed up, some parents choose denial so strong it could power a small city. Patricia had apparently decided that rather than accept the possibility that her daughter was capable of cheating, it was easier to believe that I'd suddenly turned into a psychotic monster who threw his wife's clothes out for fun. Patricia, I said, switching to my most reasonable, patient voice, the one I used when explaining basic computer concepts to elderly relatives. Let me ask you something. In the 5 years Julia and I have been married, have I ever done anything even remotely like this before? Have I ever thrown her things out? Have I ever been cruel or vindictive or unreasonable? There was a pause, and I could practically hear her brain working overtime to find some past incident she could use against me. The truth was, I'd been a model husband by any reasonable standard, faithful, supportive, patient with her family, tolerant of her shopping habits, and willing to sit through more romantic comedies than any straight man should have to endure. That doesn't matter, she finally sputtered. People can snap. People can have mental breakdowns. And clearly, that's what's happened here. Or, I suggested helpfully, your daughter sent me a text message telling me she was working overnight with her boss for the first time in 5 years, and I put 2 and 2 together and got affair. You know, like a functioning adult with basic pattern recognition skills. Marriage vows, Patricia screamed, apparently deciding to abandon logical arguments in favor of random relationship concepts. You took marriage vows, Marcus, for better or worse, in sickness and in health. You're absolutely right, I agreed. I did take those vows, and I kept them. Every single one. But here's the thing, Patricia, those vows were supposed to be mutual. Pretty sure till paperwork do us part wasn't in the original contract. The silence that followed was so complete I thought she might have actually fainted. When she finally spoke again, her voice had dropped to that dangerous whisper that mothers use right before they completely lose their shit. You are a horrible, spiteful man, Marcus Dalton. And when Julia comes to her senses and realizes what a mistake she's made, you'll be sorry. You'll be sorry you treated her this way. Patricia, I said, finishing the last of my coffee and feeling surprisingly zen about this whole conversation. Julia made her choice when she decided to spend the night with her boss instead of coming home to her husband. I didn't break our marriage. I just provided the moving services when it was already over. This isn't over, she hissed. You haven't heard the last of this. And then she hung up on me. Actually hung up, like we were teenagers having a fight about curfew instead of adults dealing with the aftermath of adultery. I sat there for a moment, staring at my phone, and then did something I hadn't done in months. I laughed. Not the bitter, angry laugh of a man whose world was falling apart, but the genuine, belly-deep laughter of someone who'd just realized how absurd his life had become. Here I was, being lectured about marriage vows by the mother of a woman who was currently explaining to her boss why her entire wardrobe had mysteriously appeared outside his office door. My eggs, the perfect over-easy ones I'd made while Patricia delivered her sermon, were waiting for me on the counter, and they tasted better than anything I'd eaten in months. Maybe it was the absence of guilt, or maybe it was the presence of justice, but everything seemed more flavorful when you weren't pretending your life was something it wasn't. I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, probably other members of Julia's family preparing their own interventions. My voicemail was probably filling up with lectures about forgiveness and working things out and giving people second chances. But you know what? My coffee was perfect, my eggs were delicious, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Around noon, just as I was settling into what was shaping up to be the most productive work-from-home day I'd had in months, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Now, normally I'd let unknown numbers go straight to voicemail, because 90% of the time it's either a telemarketer trying to sell me an extended warranty for a car I don't own, or some robot informing me that my social security number has been suspended for suspicious activity. But today felt different. Today felt like the universe was lining up all the players for the grand finale of this domestic drama, and I didn't want to miss any of the performances. Marcus Dalton. I answered in my most professional voice, the one I use for client calls when I want to sound like a competent adult who definitely has his life together. Marcus, this is Joe Richardson. The voice on the other end was trying way too hard to sound calm and authoritative, like a substitute teacher attempting to control a classroom full of teenagers who already smell weakness. I think we need to talk. Oh, this was Rich. Joe Richardson, the man, the myth, the legend who'd been playing hide the salami with my wife, was actually calling me directly. I had to give him credit for having the balls to make this call, even though his voice was tighter than a jar of pickles that's been sitting in the back of the fridge for 3 years. Joe, I said with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for running into old college friends at the grocery store. What a pleasant surprise. How's the office today? Getting a lot of work done, I hope. There was a pause so long I started to wonder if he'd chickened out and hung up. When he finally spoke, I could practically hear him choosing each word like he was defusing a bomb. Marcus, there seems to be a misunderstanding. There are some belongings, Julia's belongings, piled outside my office door. Misunderstanding, I repeated, injecting just the right amount of confusion into my voice. No, Joe, there's no misunderstanding at all. Those are definitely Julia's belongings, and they are definitely outside your office door. I'm actually pretty proud of how neatly I stacked everything. Did you notice the organizational system? I went by color coordination for the boxes, seasonal rotation for the shoes. It's like a little fashion museum right there in your hallway. Marcus, Joe's voice had that strained quality of someone trying to maintain professional composure while their world implodes around them. I don't know what you think is going on here, but I can assure you that my relationship with Julia is purely professional. Professional, I mused, settling back in my chair and putting my feet up on the coffee table. That's an interesting word choice, Joe. Very corporate. Very sanitized. I suppose, working overnight, could be considered professional development, depending on your definition of work. Look, Joe said, and now I could hear the desperation creeping in around the edges of his carefully modulated tone. I think there's been some kind of mix-up. Julia mentioned she might be staying late to finish some project deadlines, but nothing inappropriate happened. Oh, Joe, I said with the kind of patronizing sympathy usually reserved for explaining death to small children. You don't have to lie to me. I'm not HR. I'm not going to file a complaint about workplace relationships. Hell, I'm not even technically family anymore. So really, this is between you and Julia now. The silence that followed was so thick you could practically cut it with a knife. I could almost picture Joe sitting in his fancy corner office, probably loosening his tie and wondering how the hell he'd gotten himself into this mess. The guy had probably thought he was living some kind of executive fantasy, successful businessman, hot affair with a married subordinate, all the excitement of forbidden romance without any of the consequences. Except now the consequences were literally stacked outside his door in 10 carefully labeled boxes. Marcus, I need you to understand something, Joe finally said, and his voice had shifted into what I recognized as damage control mode. Even if there were personal feelings involved, Julia is going through a difficult time in her marriage. She's been unhappy for months. Unhappy? I practically choked on my coffee. Joe, buddy, let me stop you right there. Julia's been unhappy? Julia, who spent last weekend at the spa with her girlfriends using my credit card. Julia, who just bought a $3,000 handbag because it was an investment piece. Julia, who has had exactly 0 conversations with me about being unhappy in our marriage. That Julia. People don't always communicate their feelings clearly, Joe stammered, clearly realizing he'd wandered into conversational quicksand. You're absolutely right, I agreed cheerfully. Take last night, for example. Instead of saying, Marcus, I'm unhappy in our marriage and I want a divorce, she texted me that she was working overnight with her boss. Very unclear communication. I had to read between the lines. Good thing I'm excellent at subtext. This is, Joe started, then seemed to lose steam mid-sentence. Complicated, I suggested helpfully. Awkward? A career-limiting move? Yeah, I bet it is. But here's the good news, Joe. It's not complicated anymore. All of Julia's stuff is right there outside your office, so now you don't have to sneak around. You can just officially be the guy who's dating the woman whose husband delivered her entire wardrobe to your workplace. That's not complicated at all. That's just public. Look, I don't know what you want from me, Joe said, and now he just sounded tired. Defeated. Like a man who'd thought he was playing chess, but suddenly realized he'd been playing checkers against a grandmaster. Want from you? I laughed, genuinely amused by the question. Joe, I don't want anything from you. You've already given me everything I needed. You've taken my cheating wife off my hands. That's not a demand. That's a service. Hell, I should probably be paying you. That's not. This isn't how I wanted things to go. Oh, Joe, I said, my voice dripping with mock sympathy. Life rarely goes how we want it to, does it? But here's a piece of free advice from someone who's been married for 5 years. When you're dating someone new, make sure they actually leave their husband first. It saves on delivery charges. Don't worry, Joe, I added, grinning at my own reflection in the dark computer screen. I left her yoga mat too. She'll need it, for stretching excuses. The click of him hanging up was absolutely beautiful. You know what they say about desperate times calling for desperate measures? Well, apparently Julia's definition of desperate measures involved going full-blown victim mode on Facebook, because by 2 p.m. my phone was lighting up with notifications like I'd just gone viral for rescuing puppies from a burning building. Except instead of heartwarming animal rescue content, I was apparently the star of a domestic abuse awareness campaign. The first notification came from my cousin Mike. Dude, what the hell is Julia posting about you on Facebook? Followed immediately by a screenshot that made my blood pressure spike and my coffee taste like battery acid. There it was, in all its manipulative glory. A Facebook post that would have made a soap opera writer weep with envy. Julia had crafted what I can only describe as a masterpiece of selective storytelling, complete with all the buzzwords guaranteed to trigger maximum sympathy from her army of wine mom followers and yoga class friends. I never thought I'd be writing this post. It began, because of course it did. But I need my friends and family to know the truth about what's happening. My husband has become abusive and controlling. Last night, He threw all of my belongings out of our home without warning. I came home to find my entire life scattered and destroyed. I'm scared, hurt, and don't know where to turn. Please don't believe any lies he might try to spread about me. I'm just trying to survive this nightmare. I stared at my phone screen, reading and rereading this creative writing exercise masquerading as a cry for help. And I had to admit, Julia had missed her calling as a fiction writer. The woman who'd been texting her boss about overnight work sessions had somehow transformed herself into a battered wife fleeing domestic violence. It was like watching a magic trick performed by someone with absolutely no shame and a PhD in gaslighting. The comments were already pouring in like a digital lynch mob armed with heart emojis and righteous indignation. OMG, Julia, I'm so sorry. What a monster. You deserve so much better. Stay strong, babe. The whole thing read like a support group for people who'd never actually met me, but were absolutely certain I was the Antichrist based on one carefully crafted Facebook post. But here's the thing about Julia's little social media strategy. She'd apparently forgotten that I'm not some technologically challenged boomer who thinks the Facebook is where young people share pictures of their lunch. I've been on social media since back when you needed a college email address just to sign up, and I understand the fundamental rule of internet warfare. Whoever has the receipts wins. I screenshot Julia's post, saved it to my phone, and then opened up my own Facebook account. Now, I'm not usually one for airing dirty laundry on social media. I'm more of a keep your personal business personal kind of guy. But when someone declares war using lies and manipulation, sometimes you have to fight fire with screenshots. My response post was a thing of beauty, crafted with the precision of a surgeon and the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Since my wife has decided to take our personal business public, I guess it's time to set the record straight. Here's the text message she sent me last night. Then I posted a crystal clear screenshot of Julia's working overnight with my boss Joe message, complete with timestamp and her contact photo smiling innocently at the top of the screen. But I wasn't done. Oh no, this was just the opening salvo. And here's where I threw her belongings out. I continued, posting the beautiful photograph I'd taken of her neatly organized mountain of boxes outside Joe's office door. Professional delivery service, right to her new workplace. Because I'm thoughtful like that. The response was immediate and glorious. Within 10 minutes, I had more notifications than a teenager posting thirst traps on Instagram. Comments started flooding in faster than I could read them, and the tone shift was so dramatic you could practically hear the collective, "Oh shit," echoing across the internet. DAM and Marcus, from my buddy Chris. Receipts, from my coworker Sandra. Plot twist, from my neighbor's wife who apparently lived for this kind of suburban drama. And my personal favorite, from Julia's own college roommate. Girl, this ain't it. But the real entertainment came from watching Julia's support squad slowly realize they'd been played. Comments on her original post started getting deleted as her friends began to understand that maybe, just maybe, they'd jumped on the wrong bandwagon. It was like watching dominoes fall in reverse, except instead of falling down, people were falling away from Julia's narrative faster than rats abandoning a sinking ship. The popcorn emoji responses started showing up in my DMs like I was hosting the world's most entertaining reality show. People were forwarding screenshots of Julia's post to their friends, not out of sympathy for her plight, but because it had become the internet equivalent of watching a train wreck in slow motion. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister. "Holy shit, Marcus. Did Julia really think this would work?" Followed immediately by another message. "Also, why didn't you tell me she was cheating? I've been sending her birthday cards for years." The beauty of Julia's social media strategy was that it had backfired so spectacularly, it was almost artistic. In trying to paint me as an abusive monster, she'd actually provided me with the perfect platform to reveal the truth about her affair. Her own Facebook post had become evidence against her, and every person who'd initially jumped to her defense was now quietly unfriending her, or, even better, sending me private messages apologizing for their hasty judgment. By 4 p.m., Julia had deleted her original post, but the internet is forever, and screenshots live on in the phones of every person who'd witnessed her spectacular self-destruction. The damage was done, her reputation was toast, and I hadn't even had to get mean about it. I'd just provided facts, timestamps, and photographic evidence, letting the truth speak for itself. My cousin Mike texted me, "Dude, You just won the internet. That was beautiful. And honestly, it really was. Julia had tried to weaponize social media against me, but she'd forgotten the cardinal rule of online warfare. Never start a fight with someone who has better evidence and a more compelling story. The irony wasn't lost on me that in trying to destroy my reputation, Julia had actually enhanced it. I was no longer Marcus the software consultant. I was Marcus the guy who'd handled his wife's affair with style, grace, and the kind of strategic thinking that made people respect the hell out of him. Half of her friends had unfriended her by dinner time. The other half were sliding into my DMs asking for the full story. If I thought Julia's social media meltdown was the grand finale of her spectacular self-destruction tour, I was dead wrong. Apparently, public humiliation was just the warm-up act for what turned out to be the main event, a masterclass in how to turn adultery into felony charges in 3 easy steps. It was around 6 p.m. when my phone buzzed with a text that made me nearly choke on the beer I was enjoying while reading the increasingly desperate comments on Julia's deleted Facebook post. The message was from my bank's fraud alert system, and it was the kind of notification that makes your heart rate spike and your palms sweat, even when you know you haven't done anything wrong. Fraud alert. We've detected suspicious activity on your account ending in 4738. Transaction attempted. $847.63 at Nordstrom. Text yes to approve or no to decline. I stared at that message for a full 30 seconds, my brain trying to process what I was seeing. Julia was attempting to use my credit card. My credit card. The one I'd specifically told her was for emergencies only, back when I still believed her definition of emergency matched mine, instead of apparently meaning funding my new life with my boss after my husband discovers my affair. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. Here was a woman who less than 18 hours ago had been caught red-handed cheating on me, who'd spent the day playing victim on social media, and who was presumably somewhere explaining to Joe why her entire wardrobe had mysteriously appeared at his office, and she was shopping. Not just shopping, but shopping with MY money, as if nothing had changed, as if she still had any claim to our joint finances. I texted back, so fast I probably broke some kind of speed record, then immediately called the bank's fraud hotline. The automated system connected me to a customer service representative named Derek, who sounded like he was probably younger than my laptop, but had the kind of professional competence that made me feel better about the banking industry. Mr. Dalton, Derek said after I'd explained the situation, I see you've declined this transaction. Are you saying this is fraudulent activity? Derek, I said, settling into my couch with the kind of grim satisfaction that comes with watching karma work over time. My wife is attempting to use my credit card without permission after I discovered she's been having an affair with her boss. She doesn't live here anymore. I delivered all her belongings to her new boyfriend's office this morning. So yes, I'd say this qualifies as fraudulent activity. There was a pause, and I could practically hear Derek's training manual being mentally consulted. Okay, sir, I'm going to flag this card for suspicious activity and issue you a new one. Any other cards she might have access to? Actually, I said, pulling up my banking app with the kind of efficiency that would have made my old project management professor proud. Let me check something. I scrolled through recent transactions, and what I found made me laugh so hard that Derek asked if I was okay. Derek, my friend, I said, still chuckling. She tried to use the card twice. The first transaction was declined 30 minutes ago at some fancy restaurant downtown, probably trying to buy dinner for her and Joe. The second one you just alerted me about was at Nordstrom. She's not just attempting fraud, she's attempting systematic fraud. I see that now, Derek confirmed, and I could hear him typing away on his keyboard. Transaction at Romano's Italian Bistro for $156.23. Also declined due to our fraud protection algorithms. And yes, the Nordstrom transaction for $847.63. Should we contact law enforcement about this, Mr. Dalton? And there it was, the moment when Julia's bad decisions officially crossed the line from morally questionable into legally stupid. Credit card fraud isn't just a civil matter you handle in divorce court. It's a felony that comes with actual consequences, like the kind that show up on background checks and make future employers ask uncomfortable questions. Derek, I said, feeling like Christmas morning and my birthday had somehow merged into one perfect moment. I think that's exactly what we should do. While Derek transferred me to the bank's fraud investigation department, I took a moment to appreciate the beautiful irony of the situation. Julia, in her infinite wisdom, had decided that the best response to being caught cheating was to compound her problems by committing actual crimes. It was like watching someone pour gasoline on a house fire because they thought it might help put out the flames. The fraud investigator, a woman named Jennifer who sounded like she'd handled about 10,000 cases just like this one, walked me through the process with the kind of professional efficiency that made me understand why people become accountants. Mr. Dalton, Jennifer explained, when someone uses a credit card without the cardholder's permission, that's considered identity theft under federal law. Given that you're in the process of separating from your wife, and she no longer has your permission to use these cards, this falls under our standard fraud protocol. What does that mean exactly? I asked, even though I was pretty sure I knew the answer and was just savoring the moment. It means we file a police report, Jennifer said matter-of-factly. The card is flagged as stolen, and any further attempts to use it will be reported as fraudulent activity. Depending on the total amount of unauthorized charges, this could result in misdemeanor or felony charges. I had to put the phone on mute for a moment because I was laughing too hard to maintain professional composure. Julia had gone from adultery to attempted fraud in less than 24 hours. At this rate, she'd be running a Ponzi scheme by Friday and robbing banks by the weekend. Jennifer, I said, composing myself, I think we should definitely file that police report. I'll need to transfer you to Officer Martinez with the Financial Crimes Unit, she said. He'll take your statement and issue a case number. 20 minutes later, I had a police report number, a new credit card being expedited to my address, and the satisfaction of knowing that Julia's shopping spree had been permanently canceled. But the real cherry on top came when my phone rang again, this time with a call from Officer Martinez himself. Mr. Dalton, Officer Martinez said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that comes with a badge and years of dealing with people making spectacularly bad decisions. We've got your fraud report, and I wanted you to know, your wife just tried to use the card again. Gas station this time. The transaction was automatically flagged and declined. 3 times? I asked, genuinely impressed by Julia's commitment to her new life of crime. 3 times, he confirmed. That bumps this up to a pattern of fraudulent activity. We'll be issuing a warrant for her arrest. I hung up the phone and raised my beer in a toast to the empty apartment. Congratulations, Julia, I said to no one in particular. You've graduated from cheating wife to federal criminal. Mom would be so proud. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of deceptive peace that makes you think maybe, just maybe, the universe has decided to give you a break from the chaos. I was sitting on my couch, drinking coffee from Julia's favorite mug, the one that said "World's Best Wife" in sparkly pink letters, which now felt like the universe's idea of a practical joke, when I heard the unmistakable sound of amateur criminals attempting what they probably thought was a stealth operation. The first clue was the rumble of a diesel engine outside my apartment complex, followed by car doors slamming with all the subtlety of a marching band practicing in a library. Then came the voices, loud, confident, and dumb enough to make you wonder if natural selection had somehow taken a coffee break. All right, so we just get her stuff and get out, one voice said, probably thinking he was whispering, but actually broadcasting at a volume that could be heard from space. In and out, 5 minutes max. I crept to my front window and peered through the blinds like some suburban spy, and what I saw was better than anything Hollywood could have scripted. Julia had apparently called in reinforcements in the form of her cousins Trevor and Kyle, 2 guys who looked like they'd been rejected from every protein powder commercial ever made. These were the kind of men who wore tank tops to formal events and thought business casual meant wearing jeans without holes in them. Trevor, the taller of the 2 walking disasters, was carrying what appeared to be a crowbar, because apparently someone had convinced him that breaking into an apartment required the full Home Depot toolkit experience. Kyle, meanwhile, was lugging a duffel bag that probably contained enough amateur burglary equipment to stock a very unsuccessful pawn shop. And there was Julia, standing behind them like a general commanding the world's least competent army, gesturing toward my front door with the kind of authority usually reserved for directing traffic during a natural disaster. Everything valuable is in the bedroom, she was saying, loud enough for Mrs. Henderson next door to probably record the entire conversation. Just grab whatever you can carry. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing out loud. Here was a woman who'd spent the last 2 days escalating from adultery to fraud, and now she'd apparently decided to add breaking and entering to her growing criminal resume. At this point, I was genuinely curious to see what illegal activity she'd try next. Tax evasion? Identity theft? Running an underground fight club? But here's the thing about being married to someone for 5 years. You learn their patterns. Julia was predictable in her unpredictability. She always doubled down when she was cornered, always believed she could charm or manipulate her way out of consequences, and always underestimated everyone around her. Which is why I'd spent Friday evening making a few phone calls to people who might appreciate front row seats to whatever Julia was planning. My brother Sam had been more than happy to drive over when I explained the situation. Sam's one of those guys who lifts weights for fun and considers helping family to include providing intimidation services when necessary. He'd been sitting in my kitchen for the past hour, drinking coffee and practicing his disappointed older brother face in preparation for whatever stupid thing Julia was about to attempt. My best friend Luis had shown up around 9, ostensibly to help me organize my suddenly bachelor pad apartment, but really because he had a sixth sense for drama and the kind of smartphone camera skills that could make anything look like a documentary. Luis was the friend who always had popcorn ready for other people's disasters, except this time he'd brought actual popcorn. And then there was Officer Jenkins, my buddy from college who'd responded to my casual text about expecting some unwanted visitors by showing up in his patrol car with the kind of timing that made me believe in divine intervention. Jenkins had always been the responsible one in our friend group, the guy who became a cop because he actually wanted to help people, but he also had a sense of humor about the absurdities of human behavior. So when Trevor started fumbling with what appeared to be lock-picking tools that he'd probably ordered from some sketchy website, I was ready for the show. You getting this? I whispered to Luis, who was positioned by the window with his phone already recording. Oh, I'm getting all of this, Luis whispered back, grinning like he'd won the lottery. This is going straight to my Instagram story. My followers are going to lose their minds. Trevor had managed to get some kind of tool into my lock and was jiggling it around with the confidence of someone who'd watched exactly one YouTube tutorial about lock picking and considered himself an expert. Kyle was standing guard, which apparently meant checking his phone every 30 seconds and occasionally looking around like a prairie dog scanning for predators. Julia was pacing behind them, clearly getting more agitated by the minute as her crack team of amateur burglars failed to gain entry with the efficiency she'd apparently expected. Come on, she hissed. How hard can it be? It's just a lock. That's when Sam decided to make his grand entrance. He opened my front door from the inside, because of course I'd given him a key years ago, and stepped into the hallway like a bouncer who'd just caught someone trying to sneak into a club with a fake ID. Evening, folks, Sam said in that perfectly calm voice that somehow managed to sound more threatening than any amount of yelling. Beautiful night for breaking and entering, isn't it? Trevor dropped his lock-picking tools so fast you'd have thought they'd suddenly caught fire. Kyle actually jumped backward and nearly tripped over his own feet, which would have been hilarious if Luis hadn't already been recording the whole thing. Julia went completely white, like she'd just seen a ghost, except the ghost was her own poor life choices coming back to haunt her. We're just getting Julia's things, Trevor stammered, clearly realizing that his criminal mastermind plan had hit a significant snag in the form of a very large, very unimpressed man blocking their path. That's funny, Sam said, crossing his arms in a way that made his biceps look like they belonged in a superhero movie. Because I was under the impression that Julia's things were delivered to her new workplace a couple days ago. That's when Officer Jenkins chose his moment to step around the corner, badge clearly visible, with the kind of casual authority that comes from years of dealing with people making spectacularly bad decisions. Evening, everyone, Jenkins said cheerfully. Hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Just happened to be in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by to see how Marcus was doing. The look on Julia's face was absolutely priceless, like she'd just realized she was the star of her own personal episode of Cops. By the end of the week, Julia's reputation around town looked like my old gym socks, completely destroyed, permanently stained, and something you'd only touch while wearing protective gloves. The whole attempted break-in fiasco had been the final nail in the coffin of her carefully constructed image as a respectable suburban wife. Officer Jenkins had been absolutely professional about the whole thing, taking statements and explaining to Trevor and Kyle exactly how many laws they'd attempted to break in their 5-minute criminal career, while Julia stood there looking like someone who'd just realized she'd been playing chess with a pigeon. The best part? Luis's Instagram video of the whole thing had gone moderately viral in our little corner of the internet. Nothing major, just enough to ensure that everyone in our social circle, our neighborhood, and probably 3 surrounding zip codes knew exactly what kind of person Julia had revealed herself to be. The comments section was a masterpiece of suburban schadenfreude, with neighbors and acquaintances sharing their own stories about suspicious behavior they'd noticed but been too polite to mention. Mrs. Henderson had become something of a local celebrity, giving interviews to anyone who'd listen about how she'd always known something was off about Julia, conveniently forgetting that she'd been perfectly friendly with her right up until the moment the drama exploded. It's amazing how quickly people rewrite history when they want to be on the winning side of a neighborhood scandal. The criminal charges were proceeding exactly as Officer Martinez had promised. Julia's attempt at credit card fraud had been officially documented, and her lawyer, some overpriced suit who specialized in damage control for people with more money than sense, had already called me twice trying to negotiate some kind of settlement that would make the charges disappear. Both times, I politely explained that I wasn't interested in helping Julia avoid the consequences of her own actions, and both times the lawyer had sounded like he was developing an ulcer. Joe, meanwhile, had apparently decided that dating a woman facing felony fraud charges wasn't the kind of office romance that enhanced his professional reputation. According to my sources, and by sources, I mean Linda from accounting who'd called me after seeing the Instagram video, Julia had been transferred to a different department, which was corporate speak for demoted to a position where she couldn't embarrass us anymore. Word was that Joe had started avoiding her like she had some kind of contagious disease that could be transmitted through awkward elevator rides. It was Thursday evening when Julia made her final phone call to me, and honestly, I'd been wondering when she'd finally break down and try the direct approach. Her voice was completely different from the confident, manipulative tone she'd used during our last few conversations. She sounded tired, defeated, and genuinely desperate in a way that might have made me feel bad for her if I hadn't spent the week dealing with the aftermath of her increasingly creative attempts at self-destruction. "Marcus," she said, and I could hear her crying, not the angry, frustrated tears from earlier in the week, but the kind of broken sobbing that happens when someone finally realizes they've burned every bridge they ever had. "You'll regret this. You'll never find anyone like me." I was sitting in my newly organized living room, which looked completely different without Julia's extensive collection of decorative pillows and inspirational wall art. The space felt bigger, cleaner, and somehow more honest without all the carefully curated Instagram-worthy accessories that had been designed to project an image of domestic bliss rather than create actual happiness. I raised my glass of wine, a really good bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion, which this definitely qualified as, and looked around my peaceful, drama-free apartment. "Exactly, Julia," I said, unable to keep the smile out of my voice. "I'll never find anyone like you. And that's the best part." The silence that followed was so complete I thought she might have hung up, but then I heard her take a shaky breath like she was preparing to say something that would somehow fix everything she'd broken. Instead, she just whispered, "I'm sorry," and ended the call. I sat there for a moment, looking at my phone and realizing that this was probably the last conversation I'd ever have with the woman I'd been married to for 5 years. It should have felt sadder, more final, like the end of an important chapter in my life. Instead, it felt like finally taking off shoes that had been too tight for way too long. My phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't Julia. It was a text from Emily, my coworker who'd been sending increasingly friendly messages since the whole drama had started playing out. Emily was one of those rare people who actually laughed at my jokes, even the bad ones, and who'd always struck me as the kind of person who said what she meant and meant what she said. "Hey Marcus," the text read, "coffee tomorrow? I promise no overnight shifts with Joe." I actually laughed out loud at that, partly because it was genuinely funny and partly because it felt so refreshingly normal after a week of dealing with attempted burglary and credit card fraud. Emily knew the whole story. Hell, everyone knew the whole story at this point. But instead of treating me like I was either a victim to be pitied or a cautionary tale to be avoided, she was making jokes and asking me out for coffee like I was just a regular guy who happened to be newly single. Sure, I texted back. But I should warn you, I'm apparently the kind of guy who delivers his wife's belongings to her affair partner's office. Some people might consider that a red flag. Her response came back almost immediately. Some people might consider that efficient. I like efficiency. I grinned at my phone like a teenager getting his first text from a crush, which was ridiculous but also kind of wonderful. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt genuinely excited about what might happen next instead of dreading whatever drama was waiting around the corner. The apartment was quiet in a way it hadn't been in a long time. Not the tense quiet of unspoken problems and growing resentment, but the peaceful quiet of a space that belonged entirely to me. I could eat what I wanted, watch what I wanted, and make decisions based on what made me happy instead of what would avoid an argument. I finished my wine and looked around my newly reclaimed living space. Julia was gone, taking with her all the stress and uncertainty that had been poisoning our relationship for longer than I'd been willing to admit. Joe had inherited the headache of dating someone whose idea of problem-solving involved escalating to criminal behavior. And me? I finally had my peace, my freedom, and a damn good story that would probably keep people entertained at parties for years. Tomorrow I'd have coffee with Emily, and maybe we'd laugh about the absurdity of modern relationships. Maybe we'd discover we had more in common than just a sense of humor about workplace drama. Or maybe we'd just have a nice conversation between two adults who understood that honesty and basic human decency weren't negotiable relationship requirements. For the first time in years, I felt light. The future was wide open, full of possibilities that didn't involve wondering what my wife was really doing when she said she was working late. Whatever came next, it would be built on truth instead of lies, respect instead of manipulation, and the kind of genuine connection that doesn't require breaking any laws to maintain. I raised my empty wine glass in a final toast to the apartment, to freedom, and to whatever adventures awaited a newly single software consultant with a great sense of humor and absolutely no tolerance for bullshit. Here's to new beginnings. I said to no one in particular, and meant every word.